It was used for all the services here in this church at its founding and for many years afterwards. So, as a reminder, our parish of Saints Peter and Paul, it was established through the efforts and donations of the Brotherhood of Saints Peter and Paul. There are a bunch of workers who got together, basically, and organized the Brotherhood and petitioned the Church of Russia to provide them with a priest and establish a church, which indeed happened. And so, though that initial group, the large majority of them were, well, they called themselves Russians. That is more than a little complicated, because that meant that they had either at the time they immigrated or in recent memory been part of the Russian Empire, which had been quite extensive, especially earlier, like in the 1700s and 1800s, and still was rather extensive, 1910, 1911, when they're doing this. 1908 is when the Brotherhood starts. So anyway, saying you were Russian then was often, that just meant that you were Slavic. And Polish got used in a similar way. There were many times when people would say they're Polish, and that, again, often meant that you were just Slavic. So many of them are in, current-day Ukraine. Others are from as far as like Slovakia and things like that. So it's complicated. But Slavonic is pretty interesting, because that's actually more what St. Cyril and Methodius, who are there, they're the two saints in the far corner wall near the iconostasis here in our church. We celebrate their memory because they were the ones who came as missionaries to the South Slavs, so Bulgarians and Slovakians and so on, who didn't. It's not like they had those nice, neat ethnic or national identities back then. But in any case, that was the kind of people in a language that wasn't Greek, wasn't Latin. They did not have. In fact, they did not have a written language of their own, and so Saint Cyril and Methodius, when they came, were working to understand comprehensively the language that was being spoken there, and then from that creating an alphabet, which is a prototype of Cyrillic, and the language that they were writing works in was Old Slavonic. And so again, that's a language that's kind of reasonably mutually intelligible by all those people today, to greater or lesser degree, but it's not perfectly intelligible by any of them. So in fact, there are words whose meaning has changed dramatically. So that can be difficult for people who don't have a lot of religious education in Russia, for example, where they're hearing these services and so on, and they themselves struggle to understand in some cases without further teaching. Now, that was even more true in communities here in America, where there was Russian school here for some generations. So you would actually, after going to regular American school, you go to Russian school and learn your parents' language and some of these religious teachings and ethnic traditions as well. But the classic phenomenon among immigrant communities is that first generation, obviously, they're often rather homesick for where they came from. Second generation, strong connections. Third generation, significantly weaker attachments. They're starting to feel far more at home. It's like what they've known and what their parents knew was America, in our case. And so that's where they tend to be more directed in. And yes, so getting into the third generation, and definitely by the fourth generation, it starts to be really hard to sustain that kind of strong, close-knit, separate ethnic identity, and especially to maintain command of not merely conversational Russian, but then this liturgical language as well starts to get very difficult. So there's just a pastoral issue. I've talked with people all the time. I was just having a conversation this weekend, in fact, with a woman who was precisely from this actually her family was from St. Peter and Paul. She lives she's part of the church up in Maynard, Massachusetts now. But she was talking about this very reality where, as a child, she barely was able to follow the services that were held in Church Slavonic. And just large parts, she had no idea what it was saying. That's not the right principle. The principle that St. Cyril and Methodius taught way back when, that we celebrate as part of their memory, is that the church. There was a controversy about this. Like, some people were saying, "Oh, they should learn Latin." That was an argument being made that no, just make them all learn Latin. And they were saying that Jesus told the disciples to go out into all the nations and preach the gospel. And it is good and right and indeed necessary for every people to be able to worship in their own language and to hear the gospel proclaimed to them in their own language. So that principle remains today. And so it was a bit of a struggle to make this transition in our church, as in many churches, most churches in the Orthodox Church in America. That transition took place in the mid to late 20th century. But that now is the norm, that if you go to an OCA church, for sure, and some other Orthodox churches as well in America, that you will go and you will find the vast majority of the service will be in English. Now, there might be exceptions to that. You might go to a church and find that another language is the predominant one. Maybe it is Russian or Slavonic is the predominant one, because it's an immigrant community where that's their primary understanding, and for them it actually is something that is making it easier for them to worship and hear the gospel. And in that case, that's exactly the right thing to do. Likewise, there are places where it's Spanish or even French. There are probably some other languages being used in certain very particular communities that I'm not familiar with. But those are some definite examples within the canonical Orthodox churches that I can speak to with some familiarity. Arabic, I'm of course forgetting about some other examples of Arabic and Greek would be in other jurisdictions. So that's all fine when it's an immigrant community where there's not a lot of fluency. It's exactly the right approach. But, then again, you get to this point where you get to the children and the children's children and the children's children's children. It's like, okay, so you don't know this language of your ancestors very well, and we're kind of doing the same thing as, well, make them learn Latin, make them learn Russian, make them learn Greek. That's not the command that Jesus gave us. So anyway, Rob, we have this as a little thing that anybody could readily learn. It's not like you know what the words are because you hear them in English first, right? We used to do more. Actually, during my time, we still were doing more parts of, especially at special services, we would do more of this in Slavonic. But we actually got to a point that it's shifted back now, where we actually have a number of Russian immigrants in our church. But there was one particular point where we made this choice to go to almost everything in English, because there was this point where there was no one in the choir who actually knew Russian. They couldn't read Cyrillic. Even the transliteration of it was not really helpful. And we had more people who spoke other languages natively, not even English, but other languages. So for example, we've got a significant Romanian contingent in our parish. So we have people say, should we be having a lot of our service in Romanian? That certainly is an argument. But basically the consensus at that point, we gave it some hard thought, and the consensus was everybody here more or less is comfortable in English. So let's not be privileging one over another, and it seems to work well for as this kind of meeting point for everybody, where we're not like leaving you out, especially leaving out your choir that's supposed to be leading everyone, and the choir's like stumbling over trying to say before your cross we fall down in worship, and they're trying to do it in Slavonic, and it's like gobbledygook. It's like, this is not you're not making your Slavic speakers happy by mangling their language. So anyway, that's the story there, at least in a nutshell.